So given the theme of the day, it'll be interesting to see if the technology is working. Whenever I follow anybody from this country, I always feel like there's a requirement that I articulate. So I'll see if I can do that. I've been asked to kind of set the tone for the day. And you know, I have seen many of the speakers who are going to be talking today many times, and I have to say that this really is a great collection of really cutting-edge ideas, people who are poking at the edges of everything that's going on in the entertainment business at this moment. And you know, frankly, among the things that happens as a result of these people poking at the edges is it calls into question just about everything that you've done. When Liz asked me to do this, she asked me to pick a theme, and what I came up with is, will theatrical survive? Anybody who knows me, and there's a fair number of you in the room, knows what my answer to that would be. Otherwise, I wouldn't be plugging away at it still. I grew up as a theatrical film marketer. I've been doing it just about all my life, and I'm not about to give up on it all that easily. So I've given you my answer to that question, but I figure that at some point or another I have to tell you why. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pose a lot of questions and give you a kind of quick overview as to why I believe, in fact, theatrical release is threatened, and you know, tell you a few of the ideas that we're playing around with in terms of potential solutions for it. You know, as Liz described, my current business is one in which we're trying to use digital technology, in effect, to reinvent theatrical distribution. So, you know, I will bring up some of the things that I'm working on, you know, over the course of this talk. I hope that I'm over-caffeinated enough that I can get through this relatively quickly and leave some room for questions, because I'm bound to skip over a few things given the time frame that we're working with. So let me just start out by talking a little bit about the crisis in independent film distribution. I doubt that you know, the general public sees this crisis that I'm talking about here, you know, in any sort of shape at this moment, given the fact that on the surface, if you look at what's going on at the box office, it would appear that Hollywood, at least, has overcome the malaise of a couple of years ago, and in fact, box office is setting new records. And you know, if you look at the latest grosses on any given weekend, there doesn't appear to be a huge problem. But even the studios are ready to acknowledge the fact that where things are heading, that this may be just a blip having to do with the fact that we haven't really transitioned to whatever it is that we're going toward. Somebody once described the moment that we're in as the post-major studio pre-internet era, which is to say that we're kind of nowhere at the moment and fishing around for answers. And what I'm hoping is that between some of the things that we're doing and a lot of the things that you're going to hear about through the day are just clues in terms of where we may be heading. So let me just start out with a kind of general thing, which is consumer decisions, which is where it really all starts. When somebody's trying to make a decision as to what product they're going to buy, and it almost doesn't matter what category you're talking about, there's certain key factors in any consumer decision. And I'm probably not getting them all, but these are the ones that sort of leapt out to me. One of them is convenience. How convenient is it for you to buy that particular product? The consumer experience itself, which falls into really two categories: the quality of the product that's being sold and the quality of the environment in which it's being sold. The third thing is price, pretty important thing for most consumer decisions, and then selection. How much selection is there available at any given moment? You know, if we start with the assumption that this is where most consumer decisions come from, then let's look at the theatrical experience in those terms. It's the least convenient way to consume movies. I mean, you have to go out of the house, you have to, you know, get a babysitter if you have a family, you have to deal with the times in which the films show. It's, you know, it really is incredibly inconvenient when you think about it. It's the most expensive. Going to the movies, you know, especially for a family, I have to say that it's, you know, in terms of the current economics in the United States, it's cheaper to buy the DVD than it is to actually go out with your family to the movies. I say best experience perhaps. As home theaters get more and more capability, as theaters become more and more run down, which they do on a regular basis. I was just recently in a multiplex in New York that is one of the highest grossing theaters in the country, and it's a place called the Sony Lincoln Square. It's actually now the AMC Lincoln Square. It was only built about 12 years ago, state-of-the-art facility, and all the seats are already falling apart. It's just, an infrastructure problem that, you have to deal with when you have thousands of people coming in and out all the time. Also, audiences are a factor in both the experience on a positive side and on a negative side, which is to say that, there's more chance of somebody disturbing you in a movie theater than there is if you're seeing it at home. And the least variety. At any given moment in the multiplex, there's not a whole lot of different movies playing. I frequently open up the newspaper and find myself trying to find a movie that I'm really interested in seeing. I don't know if all of you have that same experience, but if you add all this up, least convenient, most expensive, least variety, you say to yourself, why does anybody go to the movies? This is what we're really trying to get over. And then as if that isn't enough, we have some additional problems. First of all, the marketplace is incredibly competitive. This is something that you're all aware of. There's just too many films trying to be released, and as a result, getting attention is extraordinarily difficult. And the cost of marketing keeps going up. This is a function of the competitive marketplace that the easiest, quickest fix, as long as you've got the resources, is just spend more money. That's the way to get the attention in the marketplace, and the studios keep upping the ante at any moment. Of course, there's other media now competing for leisure time. We're seeing this the most with younger generations who have all sorts of other toys that they're working with right now, or playing with right now, I should say, that are keeping them out of movie theaters and interested in other things. So, these are all factors in why, one would look at the surface and say, what's the point of theatrical release at this point? So why bother? First of all, theatrical releases as of this moment are still treated differently by the media. In the United States, there are certain key newspapers and magazines that still consider it an obligation that they have to cover movies that are being released in theaters. And just on an average Friday in the New York Times these days, there's something like 14 movies that are being reviewed, given full reviews in the newspaper, not to mention all the other coverage that they give in any given week to movies that are being released. In terms of the amount of coverage that they give to things that are going straight to TV or straight to video, the answer is that there's one column a week devoted to that. And this is, just an extreme example of a general malaise in terms of what, for whatever reason, newspapers, magazines, TV, all consider theatrical films to be worth covering, whereas movies that don't get theatrical release are just not worth the time for them, or the space, I should say. Theatrical release still, and it's probably because of the first point, still makes DVD, television, and international rights more valuable. For some reason, again, and this is true even for films that die at the box office, having some theatrical credibility really helps you to get values in the ancillary markets. And the final one, which is probably obvious to a lot of people in the room, is that just generally filmmakers still want to show their work on the big screen. I don't know how many times I've had arguments with filmmakers who have been shown the numbers in terms of how much more money they might have been able to make had they sold the film directly to TV as a premiere, and still opt to lose money and see their film on the big screen in a movie theater. So let's talk about solutions, and this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm doing in emerging pictures, but in reality, these are just, again, poking at the edges of things, trying to come up with solutions. But I do think that there are some interesting points to be made here. The first one is bring down the cost of marketing. How do we do that? Well, for starters, there's an old-fashioned model called calendar theaters. It's something that we haven't seen as much of in recent years, but basically what the idea is, if you start with the point that the audience for smaller movies is inherently limited, and that we admit to ourselves that there's a particular niche that may be interested in a movie, if we in fact limit the run of the film to specific dates and train audiences to understand that if they don't go to see it within the prescribed period of time, that it's really not going to be there any longer, then in fact you can get the same audience you might have spread out over 3 weeks in 3 days, which makes it much more economically feasible. So what we need to do is nurture those niche audiences, find out where they live, how to reach them, where do they hang out on the web and otherwise, and try to bring them together into communities, connected communities, that are interested in the same subject matter and want to assemble in a public place in order to actually consume whatever it is that you have to offer. And this is such a stupid little bullet point here, learn to use the internet. Well, you all know how to use the internet on a very basic level, but what I mean by this is that the internet is such a potential, powerful tool to bring these communities together. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because that's what a big chunk of the rest of the day is going to be about. And these are just pictures of the covers of the 2 most recent calendars for our digital cinemas in the United States. And it's just there to illustrate the point that in any given month, if you lay it out and tell people that they're going to see specific things on specific days, then in fact there's a much, much better chance that they're going to actually stick it on their calendars and come out to see the movie. I'll actually show you what the insides of these things look like in a couple of minutes. Okay, so theatrical solution number 2, more variety of programming. Let's get people used to coming into movie theaters who are not used to coming into movie theaters. Mix it up a little bit. You know, the effect that I talked about before, that the selection of films available at any given moment is pretty paltry. You may be slightly spoiled because you live in London. I have the same experience living in New York. We get way more movies than most of the rest of the world does. And there's an opportunity to provide much more varied, much more interesting programming than we are right now. I'll talk about a couple of models of this. Event-oriented releases. And what I mean by that is that a film that may be about to be released on DVD in some remastered form, like, you know, they're about to release yet another version of a remastered Blade Runner. I don't know if you're aware of that. This might be the 4th or 5th version of it. But this one is really the definitive version. You know, they're showing it at the Ziegfeld Theater in New York right now, which is one of the real, you know, showcase theaters where, you know, it's on a huge screen and where people have a reason to come out and want to see it. You know, this is the sort of thing where, you know, I would advocate that if the idea is to promote the DVD release of something like this, that when we're dealing in digital format and 35mm prints are no longer necessary, you know, why not do a one-night-only event and have it be in as many places in the country as possible, and make it into something that's being talked about as a result of the kind of stunt of releasing it that way. Those sorts of things will get people into the theater, give you the opportunity to hand out those calendars, and to make people interested in making a habit of coming to the theater to see the kind of varied programming that you're offering. One model that we've been experimenting with is the idea of a syndicated film festival. We've been doing this with thematic festivals, meaning that we wouldn't take the London Film Festival and show it in New York. That seems a little weird. But what we do is things like a Latin film festival or a gay film festival, or you know, we have a festival called Undiscovered Gems, which is films that have been hits on the film festival circuit around the world but have never achieved theatrical release in the United States. And when we call it syndicated film festivals because we take these packages of films, in essence, and instead of just floating them around the country with 35mm prints, which means that it'll take a year to get to all the various places that it would get to, we can reach a critical mass by having it be exhibited digitally and therefore in all of these cities around the country at the same time. So in effect, it becomes a national festival. And we've even done things like have audience prizes that are voted on by festivals all over the country so that they really feel like they're part of a festival, that it's not just tuning in from afar. I already talked about this, the tie-ins with DVD or TV releases. I'll give you a couple of examples of that in a minute. Better extras than DVDs. I mean, what do I mean by that? There's certain things that can only be done live that make things much more exciting. And you know, one extra that I really enjoy is that most of our theaters actually serve alcohol, and that's, you know, something you can't provide in a DVD. Although I suppose you could buy it separately and use it at the same time, but I haven't seen it packaged together yet. There is the idea of you know, Q&As, which you're used to if you're a film festival audience. But what about live Q&As that take place in 30 locations at the same time via something as simple as Skype or iChat or something along those lines? You know, we've been experimenting with those sorts of things, and in small towns around the country, they've never had a Q&A with a film director or a producer or a star before, so that even doing it remotely on screen is something that gets people very excited. And we've also discovered that having speakers that are not necessarily involved with the movie, but rather people who just are involved with the subject matter of the movie to talk about the film and just lead a discussion afterwards is an attraction to a large number of people. We did this event where we had a live feed of I believe it was a solar eclipse from Antarctica. And it was just the way the timing worked out, it was something like 10 in the morning Eastern time, and it was really, you know, much later in the rest of the country. And we got pretty huge crowds, and what we had was local meteorologists from, you know, from each city where this was going on in come and talk afterwards about, you know, what a solar eclipse is, and people were applauding the penguins, and it was a lot of fun. So this emphasis on live interaction is, you know, in a way, our equivalent, if you think about the fact that in the music business, you know, where the revenue model is shifting is toward the fact that live performances is where people are going to be making all their real money, and that the DVDs in effect become, or sorry, the CDs or the digital files or whatever they are, become the way of promoting the live music, which is, you know, it's very interesting how suddenly live, which is the one thing you can't pump through the internet with, you know, or, you know, an actual person in the room yet, you know, that's something that still is a very big attraction. So this is just an example of the inside of a sample calendar in which you can see some of these things going on. You know, if you notice the actual feature films that are in release that are included here, most of these have distribution in the United States, but most of them are actually being handled by much smaller independent distributors. They're not being handled by the major studios. There's a little bit of an issue dealing with the studios, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But these are all, you know, just about every independent distributor in the United States at this point is servicing our theaters digitally. But in addition, what we have is, you'll see on the lower right-hand corner is that Undiscovered Gems series that I was talking about, where we show one film a month that has not achieved any form of theatrical release in the United States. We've set up a competition that's sponsored by the Sundance Channel. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. It's sponsored by Sundance Channel. I've been trained not to put the article "the" in front of it because they don't use it. And IndieWire, which is, for those of you who don't know, an online publication that's trying to be like the independent internet version of Variety, just in shorthand. Those of you who haven't checked it out probably should. And the New York Times is a sponsor of the of this series. What the Times offers is a quarter-page ad for each movie, which is something that filmmakers get really excited about, and we have to move along much more quickly here. But anyway, the prize winner is actually going to win a real theatrical release, and it's voted on by the audiences in all the locations where this is being done. And this is another example of a couple of film festivals here that have been syndicated around the country. Okay, Theatrical solution number 3, bring down the costs of distribution. This is what gets me really excited, which is no more 35 millimeter prints. I don't know about you guys, but I'm sort of sick of watching those prints with all the splices and the scratches and the, all that stuff. What's great is that in a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, that they can actually be seeing the same image that we're seeing at the Ziegfeld Theater in New York. Mixing and matching programming, I've already talked about that, just doing more limited releases, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. New release patterns. I just want to point out that everybody keeps talking about how the lack of 35 millimeter prints is just a money-saving thing, but it's really about the fact that it frees us from this proposition that a theatrical release means 7 days a week, 5 shows a day, or whatever it is. Suddenly, it gets very easy to mix and match programming all day long to your heart's content. And one of the biggest issues in the competitive age that we're living in is how long can you stay in a theater and actually get word of mouth going to get your movie going even further. I can conceive of a release pattern where somebody would release a film theatrically and it would be every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock for months until word started catching on that movie, and you could actually maybe add an extra show and keep building it that way. That release pattern would make no sense whatsoever if you had a $2,500 asset sitting there. So this could potentially mean wider releases for smaller movies. You can go out much more broadly because the incremental cost of an additional theater is so much less, and shorter event-oriented releases, which I've already talked about. And it also is the opportunity to cut out the middleman. Another thing you're going to hear about a little bit later on, but the idea that it doesn't require as much infrastructure to actually send things out this way as it does through the traditional theatrical mechanisms. And so therefore, the complete notion of what a distributor is and what a distributor does is up for question. So very briefly, quick glance at what the calendar grid looks like, which is that in our theaters, they're single screens, they're single screens, and yet we're booking it as if it's a multiplex. Different show times for different audience parts. It's almost more like a network type programming situation than it is a traditional movie theater model. Okay, we're getting close on time here, so I'm going to rush through this a little bit. Theatrical solution number 4, bring down prices. This is probably a controversial notion. The truth is that, if you looked at that grid at the beginning about all the problems with theatrical, it makes no sense whatsoever that the place where you have the least selection and you have the least convenience would also be the most expensive. And I've been playing around with models where theatrical movies may eventually become completely free and sponsor supported. And especially when you consider the fact that TV is heading in the opposite direction, which is that it's actually heading toward you paying for everything, it might be a very interesting, complete paradigm shift. And then solution number 5, washing the windows. For those of you who are not familiar with it, this is a very quick glance at what the current life of a theatrical film is, with very prescribed windows of when certain things happen. This may be different from territory to territory. This is the way it is currently in the United States. There's a lot of experimentation going on with this. For those of you who are not familiar with these models, but IFC First Take is a company in the United States that's doing theatrical and VOD day and date, and it's been a very successful program with most of the revenue coming in on the VOD side. There's this film, Bob Dylan, No Direction Home. You may be familiar with it. Marty Scorsese directed it. It was made for public broadcasting in the United States. And we released it nationally in the United States for 1 day only. And then the DVD and the PBS showings happened several days later. It was enormously successful for everybody, I might add. And then finally, there's this company called HDNet that's been experimenting with the idea of there being no windows and allowing consumers to decide completely what direction they want to go, exactly how they want to get the product. To date, it hasn't been enormously successful, and I would venture to guess that part of that has to do with the actual films that have come out under this program so far. So what's the holdup? Let's talk about the Hollywood DCI standard. this is, you know, Hollywood has gotten together, as you may have heard. They have created a specification for digital cinema. I'll just throw these up on the screen and you can take a look at it for yourself. But these are impediments to lower budget independent films using this technology that's available to us today. I had a film that I produced that was selected for the Venice Film Festival this year. And at first they wanted us to do a 35mm blow-up, which we priced out at about $35,000 to do the blow-up, and then we first had to make some prints. Then we looked at doing it in this DCI standard, which was offered to us as an option. And lo and behold, when we looked at all the costs involved in doing it, it turned out to be the same $35,000. And so we ended up giving them a Digibeta tape, and it looked gorgeous. Basically, we've come up with this idea of an iCinema standard. You know, I hate the idea of standards in general, but you know, the point is that we don't want to be pejoratively pushed aside and told that anything that's not DCI is therefore not theatrical. And basically, we've been proposing this around the world. And this standard is, I mean, in effect, this standard is already available in a number of territories around the world. It's very different from what the studios want you to do. The projectors are way less expensive. And, you know, in fact, these prices that I have up here are already outdated. They're less money than this at this point. And then in terms of the encoding methodology and the way that the files are transported, it's incredibly inexpensive, incredibly easy, and it exists now, and there's no reason why we should be held up. This is just a quick map of our locations around the United States, completely useless information here. And then I just want to quickly say that you know, where I'm coming from is that with the advent of digital distribution, there's simply no excuse for distributors to justify the current economic model. They take way too much money out of the equation, and they try to justify it by making it look like rocket science, when in fact there are ways that we can get our movies out a lot more inexpensively. One final point, I'm going to skip over a lot of other stuff here, is just that I don't know how many of you are familiar with the filmmaker John Sayles. You know, he's a longtime independent filmmaker by choice. He makes a lot of money writing screenplays for Hollywood, but in reality, when he makes his own movies, he does them fiercely independently. I was approached by John and his producer, Maggie Renzi, who were curious about what we were doing in our theaters and our distribution models about a year ago for a film that was just about to go into production called Honeydripper. We're going to be releasing that movie nationally in the United States at the end of this year. And all I can say is that when somebody like John Sayles is reaching out to the new world that we're all trying to attack here today and saying, help me find a model where I can finally make some money on these movies, it's not just about first-time filmmakers trying to get their films somehow onto the internet or something along those lines. This crisis is real, and hopefully, you know, with all the people here today, we'll actually figure out how to do something about it. So, do we have time for a question or two?
Time for a question.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to know what the quality difference was between the Hollywood standard, the JPEG 2000, and your independent standard.
Well, I can't pretend that there's not a difference, but it's a difference that's mostly seen by cinematographers. And we've done a lot of testing, and most audiences really cannot tell the difference. And if you've seen digital projection at most film festivals around the world, I mean, you've seen basically what it looks like, because the level of projection that we're talking about is in fact what they use at Sundance, and they use it, you know, most of the major festivals that have any sort of digital projection at all at this point.
Can you see a pattern emerging in the kinds of films that we'll still see on big screens, and the kinds of films we'll be, you know, seeing more in home theatres and
well, I
screens?
mean, my theory about this is that I think that the theatrical business is going to bifurcate into two completely separate businesses, which is actually kind of where we were at 30 years ago. And I think the studio business is going to, the one attraction that they've got that they're going to keep pushing the limits of is this event mentality. And I think that the line between a Hollywood movie and a theme park ride is going to rapidly disappear. You know, we may get, you know, things like movable seats and, you know, things tickling your rear while you're watching the movie and stuff like that. Certainly 3D is going to be pretty big in the not too distant future. But it's, you know, it's a race to do things that they feel like it differentiates the theatrical experience from what people get at home. But the other part of the business that I think will always remain is, in fact, the artier, independent part of the business, where I do believe that there's an audience that if we keep satisfying them and giving them what they want, will keep coming back. And, you know, there's an enormous opportunity right now as the baby boomer generation is reaching the age where their leisure time is actually increasing. This is a generation that grew up going to the movies very, very frequently, and I think we just have to let them know that that experience is still waiting for them and give them the kind of selection that they're looking for to bring them back in big enough numbers to justify it. And then I think we have this challenge with the younger generation to get them interested in it as well. But I think the middle of the market between those two extremes is what people are mainly going to be watching at home.
Thanks, Ira. That's absolutely fantastic. Sorry I have to cut you off there.